On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Jeff DeVerter. He is the Chief Technology Evangelist at Rackspace. We're going to be talking about three things that could impact the success of your AI project. And the three main areas we're going to be touching are data quality, obviously enterprise adoption. I think that's actually going to be a crucial one moving forward. And then organizational structure. There are organizational structures that could impact your AI projects. And I think Jeff's going to have some feedback, insights, and he's going to share with us along those three areas. I'm super excited to have him on. Jeff, thanks for being on the show.
Amir, thank you for having me on. I'm really delighted to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. So I know when we first spoke, I mentioned, out there right now, there's a lot of talk about AI. We could talk about a lot of different things. You could talk about a lot of different things. But the one thing we wanted to focus on was some of the actual end product things. How are we going to get to success, right? It's all great. People are using it in their consumer lives, and then they start hearing things and thinking about what's going to happen in the enterprise. It doesn't translate. We saw this when, social media took off and everyone wanted to have their business applications look like, Facebook applications, Instagram applications. It didn't work. And now here we are with AI, and we need a new way to think about it. And success is going to be huge. It's going to be big dollar amounts. There's the main areas that we have to look at. So I guess maybe to start off and talk about AI success and the things that could impact it. Maybe just talk to us what success will even look like, right? At even the highest level.
So that's a really good question. I forget who the ancient philosopher was, but that was to begin with the end in mind. Really need to look up who said that. But when you think about the use case, there's a lot that has to happen. We have these three kind of breakdowns as far as the data, the org structure, and how the enterprise is going to use it. But when you think about what that tooling actually, what benefit it's going to bring, well, that's what really drives things. In my early days in tech, when I would talk to, was working in development and project teams like that, one of the best ways to get requirements out was for an app that was going to do something was to ask them, what kind of reports do you want to see out of this? Because that really was what was driving the usage and how we were going to measure that stuff. So when we think about AI, and everybody's thinking about AI, we woke up from our New Year's Eve party in 2022 and shook the cobwebs out of our head in January 1st of this year, and magically everyone could now spell ChatGPT. And we saw all of these use cases in our personal lives, and those CIOs and CTOs and CEOs in some cases came walking into the office going, I want that on top of my sales data. That's where I found a lot of the use cases tend to start. And that is, these things that leadership is getting weekly, monthly reports on, that those reports tend to drive, one report drives 50 questions. Well, how can they start answering those questions live with that data in those meetings, as opposed to waiting the next week or two or four to get the answers? And that's when I think about how companies can really think about being successful, it is when you want to ask a question of your business, what corner is the darkest? Where do you need the most interaction? Where do you need real-time responses as opposed to, I'll see you next week in our next meeting?
What's interesting is you mentioned they you have the executives coming in, they hear the buzzwords, they hear the cost savings, they hear the potential. There's a lot that goes into it. And I think a lot of times, at the executive level, we've heard this before, the cloud. Everyone came in, we're going to save a ton of money. This is going to be the route. We're going to save a ton of money. And they see that tip of the iceberg where it's some kind of dollar savings or revenue opportunity. And it's the bottom of that iceberg that really becomes problematic for people who have to execute on this. And I guess when it comes to AI, I think we're back at that same, point where we see the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be some amazing impacts, but there are some things below that if they are not lined up, you're going to struggle. I guess maybe as a starting point, maybe let's start talk about the three things at the highest level, and then we'll have you start diving into each of those.
Yeah. But to touch really quickly on the cloud metaphor, which you brought up, which is a perfect one to bring up. But if you think about the words even that you were saying right there, and that was, hey, the cloud is going to what? Save us money. That is not the pitch with AI. The pitch with AI is the cloud is going to transform who we are as organizations. It's going to open up the doors to new customers. It's going to help us serve the customers that we have now in ways that we weren't able to before, serve our employees in ways that we weren't able to before. And the other thing that's really excited about that is that it's a conversation that happens across. I know one of these things is, I'm going to take them in reverse order. Organizational structure is last, but we're going to start with it. Because it's not just when we think cloud, you know who got to make the cloud decision really with not a lot of input from anybody? It was the CIO/CTO, however the org is set up. Because making an infrastructure decision is absolutely their job to do. Now, I can't tell you how many customers I've ended up in front of who their CIO had made the decision, we're going cloud. And then they go on this multi-month, multi-year journey to get out to the cloud. And then once their infrastructure is modernized, now they're stuck because they don't have a relationship with the business that says, hey, we're now running on this new engine that has all these capabilities. Let's now get into how we either rewrite, rethink, rebrand, whatever your applications or your business processes to make better use of this infrastructure. So many companies get stuck right there. But when we think about AI crosses everything. A couple of use cases. I'm going to use Rackspace as an example. I'm not selling Rackspace. I'm just telling you, when we went out and came up with this offering of what we're doing in and around AI, that we got more excited about fixing our own problems or opportunities than getting out in front of customers. And it's exactly what we did. So one of those areas, the challenges that we saw internally was, how do we help every employee get the information they need to do their job? Now let's use the sales community for an example. They're a challenged group because at Rackspace, we do have all these different capabilities and services and whatever. Then it's hard for anybody, especially those in sales who aren't necessarily the most technical in the world, to stay up to date with it. So we wrote what we call the Intelligent Copilot for the enterprise, ICE. We like to name things with acronyms. So it's ICE. And it allows a salesperson to go in and ask a question of a product. Like we do this stuff with what we call the software-defined data center. So they could go in and literally just ask the question, what's the latest in software-defined data centers from Rackspace and our partners? Here comes all the information. Cool. Now, write an email to my customer, Bob, and tell him these top 5 things and opportunities for their industry. Here's that email, and off it goes. One very simple example. But in order to do that and to create that, there had to be alignment from, of course, IT, because there's some IT stuff involved. We had to be involved with product. We were involved with sales to understand their stuff. And then across the general population to help in our prompt engineering work so that we would be able to understand how these questions are. So that alignment becomes across the whole organization becomes very important. And what we found is not just in our own organization, but in others, that there's some adjustments to be done. You've got to get it's just like when we went to cloud and we had to do some of this. Now we have to do it on steroids. We've got to get the legal team closer to the technical team, closer to the business team. So whether these are actual organizational shifts or whether it is an introduction of groups together and dotted lining them together so that they have open dialogue, it's absolutely required. All right, you told me to breeze through some of these. I am not breezing.
Well, actually, before you breeze in, let's actually. I want to ask you a follow up on that because I think I'll probably forget. I've got goldfish memory, and I want to get it out there. But you talked about the change through, the CIO, CTO. They became the change agent for cloud. When you envision a company that wants to adopt AI, I hear a lot about business stakeholders driving. That's what I took away, and I think maybe we've seen a bit of a shift in the last decade of where the power and technology has gone, where it's gotten a little bit more complicated. Engineering, technology, that's become a lot more involved. Business stakeholders, they're trying to get more self-service tools. It sounds like ICE in your case is very self-service. Are we going to see the AI projects then owned more as business applications, more in line with each of those stakeholders? Is that what's going to happen potentially, or is that what's happening now?
It should happen. It absolutely should happen. So if you go back, I like your timeline of 10 years. So as cloud starts to become more popular, when you go back farther than that and you needed infrastructure, you needed relationships with Dell, you needed formal things, you needed all kinds of stuff. Now, to go get some cloud technology, number's not on the side. I need that.
There you go.
That. Little credit card. And that's what happened as the late teens, came along, is you had people getting software as a service capabilities. You had them with multiple cloud accounts, many cloud accounts across organizations, because it was just as easy as doing that. And well, to add to that, you had folks entering the workforce who were their technical acumen was so much higher than what I'm not being mean here, Amir, but we're not as young as others that we work with. Maybe when we entered, we went to school, we studied this stuff, we came in. Now we have people coming in working in finance or in marketing, and they're as technical astute as anybody could be. And they're making some very valid and very strong decisions. And so the role of IT changes from being this command and control to player coach. How can they enable different departments in their organizations to be as successful with technology as possible while creating the right boundaries? How do we make sure, we're backed up, we recover, we've got all the cybersecurity involved that we need to have, that people have the right training that they need to do these things, that we even get some of IT out closer into the organization so that they're true partners in all of that. So all of that is happening and was in flight. And then along comes AI, and at least to the masses. Obviously, it's a technology that's been around for decades, really started to get more visible in the early teens. And of course, now everybody can spell AI. So everybody, I think you've nailed it when you say, yes, everything has changed as far as the relationship between IT and the business. And this just makes it all the more so.
Before we leave organizational structure, you mentioned legal compliance issues. They are always involved, right? How much earlier do they need to be involved? If you're looking at organizational structure, you're looking at AI project. Does it change? Do they start earlier? I mean, what's the impact?
Well, what I think happens, and ideally, leadership has to play a very invasive role in this in the beginning, because we don't have these muscles, generally speaking, in the organization. I work in finance. These are my systems. These are my outputs. I sit in my little thing. I've got these rules and regulations and things I'm supposed to follow that I've done for forever, and I just keep doing them. But now, when these projects come along, we need to be able to shift and pull the right people at just the right time to do the thing that needs to be done, whether it is getting compliance and legal involved to make sure that the goals that we have don't have any pitfalls that we can't see around corners that would create problems, or other parts of the business, or getting other parts of IT involved, or even other departments. Maybe it's a healthcare organization pulling somebody in from the field who's actively out using and creating. One is very intimate with some of the challenges we're trying to solve, and be able to get their input. So I think in the early days, you find that leadership has to play a chess game, like literally pick the pieces up and say, now you guys are friends, and this is the outcome, and now be nice to one another. And in the future, once these relationships are built and those muscles are built of working better together, I think we'll find that people will self-associate to serve the outcome once we learn how to do it.
Absolutely. I think the segue I had in my mind to talking about enterprise adoption, I think I asked you to kind of touch on all three, but now we're in the thick of it, so we'll just kind of go with it. And when you're looking at enterprise adoption usage, I guess if we're going to draw some analogies of current versus what we've seen happen and the evolution of adoption being a key, when you're looking at AI and you're seeing consumer adoption, and now you want to have them start thinking about enterprise usage, use cases, adoption. How do you help your stakeholders? How do you set that up so that they're not confusing what they see in the consumer world and the expectations being misaligned on the enterprise side?
That's a great question. They will be misaligned early days because they see this tool that just works in a web browser and they think, oh, well, just have some of my data. Well, maybe not. Maybe it doesn't make sense to go and put your private data, your sales data, your forecast data, your product data, and put it out in through the API into ChatGPT so you can ask questions of it. But then, so that's what people will tend to think on the early side. But if we rewind the clock again, apparently we're going to do that a lot today. But if we go backwards, an organization in the past could see new technology come along. Hey, Dell's got new servers, and they will do this much more than they used to do. And so let's work with IT to make sure that we get those, because now our applications will run better, faster, cheaper. Cool. That's pretty easy to execute on. Cloud comes along. It's still a server metaphor. So we can still get out there and adopt it. Knowing that I can just use an API to get to SQL and not have to provision a SQL is a bit of a shift, and it creates some security questions, but in the end, it's great. And we move on and we do those things. But now we start to think about how do we adopt AI? And if I can't just go and shove my stuff out into a public large language model, well, then what are the first steps? It's actually those very first steps that we find are the hardest bits of the inertia to get over. First, it's envisioning but they usually have some decent ideas, and just customers just need some guidance there. But then when it comes down to now, how do we actually implement that? That's where I find the customers hard stuck. And so when we've been able to go in and help customers with that, we've got a whole kind of 3-step process to be able to do that. And it starts, I love the naming we use. The first step is ideate, which is great because anybody can think of ideas. So we bring people together to lead a workshop around those ideas. And then we take our technical experts to then start poking in the data that it would take to make that happen. And that usually is where we find the first roadblocks of, oh, this is actually a data challenge. You need 3 sources of data. Those sources currently don't talk to one another, and maybe in physically different geographic areas. That's a challenge to this sort of thing. But now we can create a roadmap of what it would take to get to an implementation, an initial MVP. We call it idea incubate, where we take those ideas and then turn it into an MVP. Let's see it in action. Let's see what it becomes. Then if there's real value, once we see that, then we can take it to an industrialized level to be able to then implement that for the masses, whether that's customer facing, employee facing, whatever it might be. But I love that flow from ideate to incubate to industrialize, because it does break it down, and it takes that fear factor away from the business who thinks, I want this fully fleshed thing running. I don't know the incremental steps to even get to that point. So we start with the ideas, figure out the data piece. We then figure out what the infrastructure looks like, get an MVP in place, and then harden.
Do you see, I guess, as we've seen, we're using ChatGPT as an example, we've seen different versions of the model. People are seeing the numbering increase incrementally. We're thinking it's learning more, it's doing more. As you look at adoption and usage, that little handoff, and obviously an LLM needs more data, needs more training. Do you see that helping? Do you see people, realizing that the model might take time to get more accurate and they're going to stick it through? Because I know we're jumping in the past, but it passes a good reflection. If reporting was off just by a little bit for an end user, they didn't believe it, they didn't trust it, they bust out Excel on their own. I'm going to do it myself, forget this. But in the case of a large language learning model of LLMs, we might need that patience.
Well, Amir, that's a really solid point. And one of the things we really seek to impress upon folks is an LLM, an AI project is not a one and done. It's not a set and forget. It's like cloud. A lot of people still struggle with that concept that they move into the cloud. They think, I did my migration. See you in 3 years when it's time to update Windows. No, that's not how the cloud works. The cloud works by you engaging with it on a day-to-day basis, tweaking, adjusting, finding better ways to do it, cheaper ways to do it, utilizing now as a service that maybe didn't exist before. And so that general thought and mindset is getting out there in the world. I'm surprised it's still not where it needs to be. But when you get to LLMs, you can go back to the very basics of it. LLMs are built on data. So first of all, that LLM has to continue to be trained on the data as it evolves over time, because a business's data just continues to grow. So there needs to be an acknowledgement at the very beginning that embarking on this is embarking on a new discipline that you will care and feed for the rest of its life, or until it needs to be done or move to a new thing. And that tends to not be a hard sell, because as they start to see the value, they realize, I would love to invest into this more because I'm getting value out of it. But there's also a recognition that V1, V.5 is going to show you directionally what it can do. It may not be perfect in its implementation. So one, you've got to adjust the data over time to be able to give the right answers so that there is trust, and a way to report when the trust isn't recognized. But then two is a way to do that and educate the model over time as the data evolves as well. Not just the quantity of data, but the type of data. Because we may build a model, I used 3 as the example before, of sources to be able to feed it back. But that really, a lot of times, is just that incubate. That's the middle one, incubate. Let's prove it on these 3 data sources. Now we get to industrialize. There's really 15 that we want to evolve to over the next 12 months. And it becomes this ongoing project. And it causes all of these downstream data projects to help make it better, so that even the application itself, that we're pulling that source data, we trust it more. It is enriched, it is purified, it is made better, so that when we start asking questions of it through the lens of the model, we get quality data back.
Before we leave adoption usage, I guess a question based on the stakeholder, and you mentioned the ideation process. Everyone's going to have ideas, everyone's excited. How do you approach that? How do you help an organization identify, I hate to use the term, the lowest hanging fruit, or maybe the best opportunity, to showcase the technology to make sure that it's a success? Like, there's going to be competing ideas, competing departments, competing budgets. How do you help an organization see that?
Yeah, I think there are really 3 guideposts there, and 2 are really at odds with one another, and that is, or can be, and that is the biggest impact balanced by the amount of risk that's going to be. So biggest impact might be my sales application that drives all of my budget or all of my revenue for the organization. That's got a little bit of risk attached to it. So I think I would probably not start there. So you're going to balance benefit, the impact versus risk, but you're also going to have a third piece to that triangle, and that would be time to implement, because we can't embark in one of these and say, we think this is going to have this outcome. It's going to be amazing. It's going to do this for your customers or your employees, and we'll show you in a year. No, I mean, that's why we designed our offering in and around the ability to do this in 2 to 4 weeks, have an ideate solution in place in 2 to 4 weeks, so that on paper, they know exactly what they could do, what its impact is going to be, and the road that it's going to take to get there. And then what it's going to take then to turn that into, in the course of just a month or 2, what it's going to take to turn that into that MVP of an offering, and be able to sit in front of executives and say, what do you want to ask the data?
Absolutely. I guess we've talked about data a bunch. The podcast listeners they're either going to be on the business side, interested in AI, or they're technologists trying to figure out how to bring in AI. But data, you've referred to data quality, data type, data alignment. I guess maybe just at the highest level, when you are referencing data and data types and success on top of your data, what does that even mean?
Ooh, that could be an existential question.
That could be that is.
Yeah. What is data? What is? So what is data? So when we're going to ask a question of the app we're going to build, let's go back to Rackspace's offer. That'll be the easiest example. So I want to be able to ask of my product suite, what is the latest from software-defined data centers available at Rackspace? The data from that comes from multiple sources. First, there's unstructured data that's coming out of SharePoint sites. There is stuff coming out of our product management applications. And then there is other sales data that we're going to pull that from, as well as the core product data that's coming from, in this case, we use VMware for all of our software-defined our data center things. So we've got all of their core data. All of that is the data that is being pulled from to educate the model to then be able to be used when I ask a question, what's the latest in software-defined data centers at Rackspace? So in that case, it's that data. We are also going to be integrating this into our Salesforce. So I'll be able to then not only be able to ask what's the latest in software-defined data centers, but who is using it? Who signed a contract? I'll pull my contract data into that as well. And if a salesperson then is doing a new contract, they'll be able to compare their contract with previous ones and find out, where are they aligned? This is a great use case for our legal team, any legal team anywhere, be able to compare contracts. So data is all of the source information that's going to inform the model, how they're going to provide information back to you.
When you're talking about these, that's actually great, the fact that you reference these different data sources coming from different systems, different owners of those systems. And if let's say we're using the sales example, and you want to sit on top of some of that usage data to help drive your sales, obviously it comes back to quality. Each of those systems, each of the users of those systems, now your AI solution sitting and is going to be dependent on the quality that's coming from those disparate systems. When you're looking at data quality, obviously it's always been a thing, but when you're looking at for AI, how is that different than maybe, let's say, if you're looking at this compared to just reporting?
It actually, I think, it accentuates the problem a little bit, because in reporting, I can look at the graph. Let's say it's sales data for my sales team for the last quarter. Here's the information. And based on that, maybe make some rough assessments as to what next quarter is going to look like based on pipeline and personnel and that sort of stuff. And as somebody who's really close to that, I am in charge of looking at the numbers and then assessing whether that's right or wrong. Now, here's the difference when we start asking, hey, how did my team perform? Used literally writing this in as a prompt. Tell me about how my team performed last month. And based on that, what's our next quarter going to look like? There's this nasty little word that nobody really used much outside of the medical field or maybe the drug field, and that's hallucination. Now we all know what hallucination is, because hallucination is the AI models making stuff up and doing it in a pretty authoritative way in the way it's going to word it. What if I'm sitting here and I say something bold and strong and I make a point and maybe it contradicts something you thought before? It makes you sit back and go, maybe I haven't thought about that really well enough and I need to go give it some thought. Well, what if when AI is doing that and now it's a hallucination and you're questioning your own ability to do this stuff based on something that's actually wrong? So the quality of that data has got to be so good, or you have to be so close to it that if there is anything that's not right, that you're able to spot those hallucinations and get it back to the engineering team so that they can fix it.
How do you go about? So that's actually a really great, discussion point, because I think when you're looking at, let's say, an end user, a stakeholder who's in sales, they want the data to kick out their information. They're trying to whatever they're doing with it. If it's favorable, they're going to love it. They might not even question it because, like, this is the best piece of data.
Somebody tells the story the way I want it told.
Yeah,
they're my best friend.
Data tells the story you want it to represent. And I guess when you're thinking about, how to get your data ready so that that stakeholder doesn't have to question, it goes back to adoption usage, the data point, they know, they're confident. How do you go about getting your data? And that's a wide question. I understand that. But what's some of the high level steps of going, all right, these are the steps that we need to understand, go through to make sure the data is quote unquote ready?
Yeah. So that's why I really like it. We've engineered this into that ICE solution. And so let's say I ask that question. I keep saying the same thing over and over. It's like I'm selling software-defined data centers. I'm not, but it's a great example. So what if I go ask, what are the top 5 things of software-defined data centers? What if the data is wrong and I'm giving points? And in my first time I gave you that example, I sent it off to Amir so I could tell him all about my customer Amir so that he would know all the 5 key points. What if those points are wrong? You've got to know these products enough to be able to look at it and go, not quite right. The other piece is that I love it in tools when they give you the source data. So we've engineered that into the ICE solution. It's also why if I need to use ChatGPT, I will tend to go use Bing's version of ChatGPT because it cites the sources a lot of times, especially for big things. And you're able to then click into it and go and say, really, is this true? And what I've often found in using tools like that is I learn something along the way. If I go ask ChatGPT a thing and up comes all the stuff, let's go back to Rackspace's example. And I go into ICE and it tells me all the things about the data center stuff. And I go, I didn't know about point 4, but if I've given the link to the documentation, I can click into it and now educate myself about that and make my prompts even better in the future.
And I guess when you're and that's actually interesting because I think, I was actually thinking about the analogy of if you have an Alexa in your house, you're already kind of used to that one statement or series of the world. You get that one statement and you think about whether or not it makes sense before you kind of go through and go, okay, well, yes or no. And then you have to go do further research. When you're looking at, I guess, going back to adoption and you're getting people to understand, you're going to get reference data points. This tool is supposed to go out, connect data in ways we haven't understood. And people are going to start to understand, I might not be able to relate this data in the way the machine can, right? The model's actually going out and finding data points that might not quite relate in your eyes, but you know what? They do. And that's the power of it. Is that just long-term education? Is that just as the tool gets used more, we get more comfortable with the idea of the machine, the learning model actually seeing the connections we just could never even imagine?
Well, Amir, that's the thing. Any tool, regardless of how great it is or not great it is, The hardest part in having that tool be successful for the reason which it was pitched is changing human behavior. And that is the hardest part of any of it. So, I may go to Bob or Jane or whomever to get my information around a specific topic, but now I've got to trust that the machine, one, is going to give me the right data, but it's going to give me more than I asked for. So, changing human behavior is the hardest part of adopting any technical system.
Absolutely. I guess before I let you go, I was kind of curious. Obviously, you're seeing projects, you're seeing people implement. We've talked about the three main things: data quality, enterprise adoption, organizational structure that impact the success. Is there something that you see that's a common thinking error about AI that exists that maybe we haven't touched on?
So we've been watching scary AI movies for a lot of decades now. Go back to Terminator, or probably some even farther. That's the one that sticks in my head. But there's a lot of doom and gloom, and I think rightly so in some cases. But maybe it's a bit misplaced. I think there's more opportunity for us to get the data wrong and get wrong answers and make wrong decisions for our businesses and run our businesses into the ground. That probably is maybe a little more realistic to the end of the world scenarios or just the end of our worlds. But there's a lot of FUD around it, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and that's. It gets back to one of the pillars for us here at Rackspace, and that is that we're not here just to help with AI. We're here to help with responsible AI, and responsible AI is making sure that these three S's we call them. It needs to be sustainable, all things sustainable. It needs to be secure. Everything has to be secure. But the other one is symbiotic. We're creating AI tools to help people do the jobs they do, not necessarily to replace them. And so I would encourage folks to look for ways. There's a million and one opportunities for that before we think about how we start firing people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always draw the analogy if somebody in from the cybersecurity space, I always go, there's a image that Hollywood's created about cybersecurity, about the person that's clickety-clacking on the keyboard constantly to either break into something or keep somebody out. That's just the image. That's my image. It's Hollywood's made it. And then, like you just mentioned, the media, Hollywood, the entertainment we consume has portrayed AI in a way that we think of it along the way of the cybersecurity, and that it is doom and gloom. And it's interesting because it's going to take a bit of a mindset shift for people to realize, the horse and buggy went away when cars came out and more jobs were created. We were okay. Certain people were displaced, but they found a way. And I think it's happened before. And I think your analogy was great.
Yeah, people were afraid when electricity showed up. Why do I need to see after dark? I'm just going to get up early in the morning to go milk the cows anyway. So it's a lot of, I love the way you said it. With each new bit of technology, there's always a concern. So let's just look for ways that we can use it for good and not for ill. And then hope the cybersecurity folks will use it as well to fight all the new battles that are showing up and let them deal with it.
Awesome, Jeff. I was going to thank you for your time. Great stuff. I'm super excited to have done this episode with you. If somebody does want to reach out to you, touch base, pick your brain for anything you mentioned, what's a good way of getting hold of you?
Hey, best way is just to go track me down over on LinkedIn. So just first character of my name, Jeff, so J DeVerter, LinkedIn / whatever it is, J. So find me over on LinkedIn.
Find you on LinkedIn. We'll include the link. I'm sure people want to reach out to you and talk to you. But again, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, if you found the episode interesting, useful, please share it with somebody else. That's how the podcast has grown. Like, subscribe, comment. Let us know how we're doing. Tell us how we can improve it. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.